In this episode, we speak with the co-founder and co-CEO at Public.com, Leif Abraham. Public.com is an investing platform that helps people become better investors. Members can build a diverse portfolio of stocks, funds, and crypto within a single platform. Launched in 2019, Leif and his team's main vision started by introducing the world to fractional investing. Public.com became the first broker-dealer to introduce commission-free, real-time investing. Then, they set their sights on creating a new kind of multi-asset investing experience. They offer the tools, data, and AI-powered insights customers need to make informed investment decisions. Prior to Public.com, Leif was the co-founder and CEO of And.co, which was acquired by Fiverr in 2019. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Leif, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about Innovative Thunder.
Wow, you dug deep, man. Okay. So I have dark days in advertising. Don't tell anyone. So I'm German originally, as you might hear from the beautiful accent. And when I was working in advertising back in Germany, that was like 2005 to 8 or so. So I moved to the US in 2008. And my buddy and I, we applied for jobs in the US and we did like a portfolio website that showed our work. And then we called that website and they kind of like named ourselves, like branded ourselves as a creative team and called ourselves Innovative Thunder. And that was then the website. And then when we took then a job in the US at this one ad agency, and they basically asked us like, oh, who's the art director of the copyright? And we didn't really have those definitions where we came from. And so we kind of tried to dodge getting kind of like put into a certain job title and whatnot. And so they ended up just giving us a job title, Innovative Thunder. So we had literally business cards that said Innovative Thunder as the job title. And that just became like a little bit of like a branded fun thing, so to say, for our job title and whatnot. And so, yeah, we had like a whole website with flames on it that we were spinning in front of and whatnot. It was quite a thing.
And did clients feel like you lived up to the moniker?
Of course. I kid you not, though. We joined that agency and then we got an own office. We had like an own designer that we got assigned that was just like designing basically this, like the ideas that we came up with for presentations and whatnot. So we somehow ended up having this like special deal with like, oh, these guys are only doing ideas and they have this crazy job title and they're getting their own designer and an office and whatnot. And honestly, I think until this day that there were a bunch of creatives who were like the same level as we are at the company who kind of like hated us for that. Because we had this really special deal that we somehow gotten, out of randomness and kindness, I guess. So, yeah.
So your background really is in this kind of creative design, advertising, maybe marketing to a certain degree. How much of your background is technology?
Yeah, so before I ended up in advertising, so I was always on like the digital side, and I ended up on the digital side because when I was literally a child in my kids' room, I started basically just like teaching myself some coding and some design. Built like websites about video games and whatnot. And then I had lucky hands, some affiliate marketing and some like dodgy ways on how to make money on the internet. And then I ended up like funding these fan sites for video games that were run by like kids like myself. And that was like pre-AWS and whatnot. And so servers were super expensive, like bandwidth was super expensive. And so I started funding these fan sites for video games and created out of that this like ad network for like the gaming sector in Germany. And so that became like a little company and whatnot. And so that was like my first stint. So, at the time I had no idea that would be called startup now and whatnot. But it was basically, I was kind of like bootstrapping my own internet businesses from my kids' room. And that's kind of how it started. And because of that, I was like, well, maybe I should study some design and da-da-da-da-da. And that's how I ended up, on the digital side in the agency world. But it was much more always the guy who was called to like build the apps and stuff, right? So
it's interesting. One of the questions that I ask sometimes on this podcast are, do you think entrepreneurs are born or made? And I'm getting the sense that in your case, it was just a natural thing for you to kind of see where you could make something interesting digitally online to start a business. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting feedback loop in the minute you figure out that your skills can make you money in a way and it overlaps with what you get joy out of.
Mm-hmm.
That cycle, of like the things you spend your time on is the things you can turn into money in your pocket. Once you get into that cycle and you realize, that's just like the things that you're good at, and getting the feedback cycle of like, I'm good at something and I'm applying this thing that I'm good at and I'm getting paid for it. I think once you're in that cycle, it is obviously quite addicting.
Yeah, there's nothing better. So then tell us how you started to find joy in online brokerage and what started you on the path of fintech and public.com.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly boring if you describe it as online brokerage, as factual as it might be. Yeah, so I had another company that was called Enco. It was like a freelancing software, like payments, invoicing, all that kind of stuff, which I sold to Fiverr, this freelance marketplace. And through a common mentor of mine, a Danish guy called Henrik Wördelin, through him, I met Yannick, my co-founder on Public. And we both sold our companies. Yannick was running like a B2B trading API. And so we both sold our companies. We were like in a similar time when we were kind of figuring out like, hey, like what should we do next? And that's where we really came together. And he like has always been in fintech, so to say. And for me, this was like really like my true first fintech, like invoicing payments. Maybe some people call that fintech. I wouldn't necessarily put it in the bucket, but through him, I really got pulled into the space. I had zero knowledge of that space beforehand and really kind of dug into it, literally learning by doing, but obviously being surrounded by a bunch of people who had way more experience in it, which made it much easier. But that's really how I kind of gained access to this, space in the first place.
And as co-CEO, how do you split up your responsibilities?
It's pretty straightforward. We have our own direct reports, and we're both also very deep in the work still. And so basically product slash some little bit of engineering, but like to us, our CTO obviously runs most of engineering. But that kind of goes into Yannick, and then pretty much everything else goes into me. And then obviously we have a pretty senior team that does operations, and includes kind of like broker jobs and finance and so on. But I'm the deepest day to day, I would say, in growth and marketing, and Yannick is deepest day to day in like product design. So that's how you can think about it. But we have our clear division of direct reports, and like a little bit also just like who has the last say in which areas of the business, and so on. To also just make decision making obviously quick. And then, there's, certain responsibilities like fundraising, board management, general high level company strategy, and so on, that we kind of share and so on. I would say though that it would be incredibly hard for me to ever be a solo founder, because I think there's a lot of goodness that comes from this like balanced decision making of having someone who experiences it the same way you do, right? The same highs as high, the same lows as low, has like pretty much the same context at most points in time, and so on. And therefore, I think being able to have this like balanced decision making between two people, I think is actually quite good.
It seems like you did have a co-founder as well, and co. Have you always had co-founders?
Yeah, yeah, always, yeah. The stuff that I did for my kids' room, they're not. It was a total solo show, but like in everything that was like proper from that point on, yeah.
And so you learned kind of how to work well as a co-founder. Did you ever feel like you weren't a good co-founder? Like the partnership wasn't going as well as it could have gone? Or, did that come to you, that kind of team-oriented collaboration, did that come to you naturally?
I would argue that you always go through cycles, right? So of course you have times where you feel like things are not going as well, like even just in relationships and whatnot, and times where you feel like everything is great and awesome. But I think the core is just to have really clear alignment. And that alignment just also comes from talking a lot with each other and sharing a lot and being okay with like sharing your feelings, as cheesy as it might sound, and like working through things and so on. And I think we have these principles at Public, and the first principle is honesty equals bullshit. And I believe in that a lot. And whenever we talk about that principle, we also talk about in the sense of that honesty is a way to build good relationships quickly. Because the faster you can get to a point with someone where you can really be straightforward and don't worry about nickel and diming every single word before you say it and so on, the better the relationship will also be, because you know that you don't have to interpret what someone really means. And so it becomes really like a mechanism of efficiency, because the more honest the relationship is and the more direct and straightforward it is. And you also recognize that even if I say something now that, maybe some person that doesn't know me as well would think like, oh, you said this in kind of like a little bit of a hurtful way or so on, that if you're more like a relationship like you have it with like a sibling, where you just don't take things personal right away, because you have the clear alignment, you have the same goal, and you're going after the same thing, then I think that honesty becomes a really just like a tool of efficiency and a tool to just like build a better relationship quickly. And I think that is the core to, also how to work with your co-founder, that, there could never be ambiguity of what does the person actually mean. Because the minute you feel like someone is playing a game or someone's not giving you to straight or whatever, that kills relationships.
Mm-hmm. And how long did it take before you could see that you were aligned and you could be honest in a vulnerable way? How long did that take when you were introduced to your current co-founder?
That's a good question. I have no idea. But I think the minute you recognize you're going to go into like a work marriage with someone, you better have it figured out by then. But I don't know. It's a good question. Not sure. And I'm sure it depends on the person as well and whatnot, right?
Right. So you've done multiple startups. You strike me as someone who has a lot of ideas. And on a recent podcast, we talked about parallel entrepreneurship versus serial entrepreneurship. Do you find yourself wanting to always start new things? Like you get new ideas and you're like, oh, that'd be really cool to do. But, I got to focus on this thing for now, and then maybe I'll do it later. Or you kind of start testing it out on the side. How do you kind of approach your ideas?
I used to be the king of side projects, aka tinkering on a lot of stuff. And during the time of my old company, Enco, that was when I learned to love to go deep. And where I think most people, when they start to come up with ideas and whatnot, I think there's this bias of wanting to do a lot and wanting to try out a bunch of ideas and like thinking that you might get bored if you only work on one thing. And I think what I have realized for myself is that I find a lot of joy in really going deep and really understanding something, really figuring out details, and therefore finding the joy in the creativity of figuring out all these little details along the way versus trying to have another really big high-level idea again and again and again. And I think also that's where you recognize you get the most personal growth out of, because I very much believe that a lot of fulfillment in your career, in your profession, comes from recognizing you're really damn good at something and getting the joy out of realizing that like I'm really damn good at this, and I'm getting the feedback that I'm good at this because I have moments of success, because I have other people that like give me the feedback that they recognize I'm really good at something, and having that feedback loop. And I think that is really motivating, and that is what a lot of fulfillment comes out of in your just like career and profession and whatever it might be, as a founder or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in order to get to that fulfillment, you need to go deep, because you're only going to be really damn good at something if you go deep.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you're building your company, sometimes, you think you're going deep in an area, but you might also question, well, but there's these other activities that are kind of tangential. Like, how do you know whether or not you should go deep on those areas that kind of surface as you're going deep on the original path? So you always have to kind of make decisions. Have you ever had situations where it was difficult to figure out which direction to move in?
Every single day. Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit different between choosing direction and going deep. Might be two different things potentially. Let me play this through a little in my head for a second, because I think going deep goes into the sense of really understanding your space, really nerding out about a certain topic. Like I can really nerd out about product growth and generally like marketing and positioning and things like that, like the psychology of people and so on. I can go really deep on that,
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to continue to dig and find people to like talk about these things. And I think that just creates just an understanding that is likely then better than people who have not gone through that, who have not spent that time to go that deep, versus what you're describing of picking a path. I think that's just a sense of, it depends on what decision you need to make, right? Because then it's just decision making and figuring out like, how do you validate which path to go down? And I think then it's more of a question of like, okay, what do you need to figure out to make an informed decision here to pick which path to go? But that might be, I think, actually a different thing than what I would think about when I talk about going deep.
I love the fact that you bring up joy and fulfillment. I've had folks on that talked about how difficult it was to go through their process, through their entrepreneurial journey, and they were ultimately able to exit and have a nice windfall, but it was painful. They look back on the experience as being painful, but I'm kind of more aligned with you. I mean, you should kind of be present in the moment thinking, this is great that I get to solve this problem. It sounds like you're very thoughtful about what you're doing day to day.
So it likely depends on where you are in your life, and your opinion might change over time because you might had certain successes and you're fine, or maybe you're burning out at some point or whatever, right? So like this might change throughout the course of anyone's life. But generally speaking, I often think about it in this way of that when most people talk about happiness and you have this like spectrum where like you have your really high highs and you have your really low lows, most people would define happiness as like staying as close to the middle as much as possible. And I would define happiness as a perspective of really experiencing life. And really experiencing life is that I want to aim for the really high highs and I want to experience those. And by doing so, I will also have really low lows and I will experience those as well. And yeah, some people might call this painful, and at times that might be. But if you're not willing to potentially have those low lows, you might also never experience the really high highs. And I want to really aim for those really high highs, like I like those high highs. I want to have those, and hopefully by doing so, I will have more of those than I will have lows, but very likely I will have a bunch of those lows as well. And so therefore, I would define the happiness a little bit more of like, trying to aim at those high highs and then also being okay with those low lows and seeing it more of as like a more extreme way to experience life, versus just trying to stay in the middle too much.
We should probably talk about your company, given this is like, I mean, we've touched on it, but we should talk about public.com because you've got a ton of users, right? You got like 3 million plus users and there's a lot of transactions happening. Tell us about your target demographic and the products that are offered.
Yeah, so Public, obviously investing app, we really just make it possible for people to build the portfolio that they want and therefore, grow their wealth over time. So on Public, you can basically invest in multiple asset classes, right? Stocks, ETFs, crypto, any type of bond, including, US treasuries, corporate bonds, right? And, a few other things that are in the works coming soon. You can also, for example, just make 5.1% on your cash, in a high yield cash account. But really how we think about it is that we're building truly something that can be the primary account for someone to build their wealth. And so within that, we're now a little over 4 years on market. In that have, to your point, been growing fairly quickly. Obviously also some tailwinds throughout that time, right? You had zero interest policy, you had COVID, etc. So there were a lot of things that kind of made us scale pretty quickly. And yeah.
Have you explored the private markets and having shares in private companies accessible to your users?
Generally, we would love to get there at some point. Obviously, there's a lot of companies that have been trying to build private market exchanges and things like that, and it's still fairly new endeavor, I would say. But the way we talk about it often is like the name of the company is public, and it's on us to define what constitutes a public market. We've done it with a few other like alternative things. So like you can also buy a piece of art on Public, for example, or we launched royalties. So you can actually invest in the royalties of the score of the Shrek movies, and then you get paid royalty payments every quarter. Just like actual cash flow. And it's actually an asset that has basically nothing to do with market conditions because it's really driven by content consumption, not by any of the typical market conditions. So you have something that's completely uncorrelated with the rest of your portfolio, very likely, and so on. So like we find these things super interesting and, see that this is something that we play an important role in and to opening more of these asset classes to more people. But even those things are still like, it's very new, right? It's very new. It's very early days. But, over time, I believe we want to make as many asset classes as possible available to our users for sure.
We're coming up on time. I do have two final questions. One is, can you tell us about a person that has had a profound impact on you?
Obviously, it would be cliche to say your parents now and whatnot. But I would say one person that I mentioned earlier also, so Henrik Verlin, who's this other Danish guy, another entrepreneur. He started also like a company called BarkBox, like a subscription box for dog toys and so on, He's been like a mentor of mine, also a mentor of Yannick's, and he's the guy who kind of brought us together. But I think two things that I always talk about when I talk about him. Number one, he definitely helped me make the leap to go after starting like a proper company again with venture funding and so on. So like my old company, I started out of a thing called Prehire, which is like a kind of incubator that he ran and so on. And so he was really instrumental in like just like helping me make that leap truly. And, even just introductions for angel investors and things like that early on to like really just make it happen. And I think without him, I don't know if I would have happened this way. And I think the second thing is he's been a great role model to be hardcore about surrounding yourself in business with people that share your values, and that life is too short to do business with bad people, so to say. And so those are two things I always bring up when I talk about Henrik, so to say. And so in that way, I think, he's definitely been instrumental in my path there for sure.
Excellent. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
I mean, talking about going deep, right? Like, very honest, I am focused on public, number one, and family, call it 50-50. And there's very little time for other things. Like I often refer to this triangle of like, friends, family, work, pick two. And it's really hard to keep the triangle going, to always have to keep three really alive. I'm trying, but generally speaking, right now it's like it's family and work. And those are the two things I'm bouncing back and forth on. And there's very little time for other things.
Well, Leif, I want to thank you for spending some time with us. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much.